Independent reports indicated that current infrastructure projects underway in Africa amount to about $22 billion. One of Africa's fastest growing economies and most in need of infrastructure development is Nigeria. Now, to discuss the state of Nigeria's infrastructure development is Mansur Ahmed, Director General of the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission. Mansuri, good evening, good afternoon from where you sit. Let's perhaps just begin by examining some of the work that you have been doing. Some people would suggest that Nigeria has been growing its economy at about 7%. It's been growing despite a deficient infrastructure system. How much more could it be growing if the infrastructure had been fixed?
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, at the current growth rate of 7% has been achieved despite a very weak infrastructure base. And the Vision 2020 for Nigeria expects that if we address the infrastructure deficit, we should be growing at a double-digit figure. So clearly, infrastructure is a major component of the economic growth trajectory for Nigeria over the next decade or so.
So tell us what has changed now that, say, for instance, an investor is listening to this conversation would say it is now time to look at Nigeria's infrastructure sector and there could be potentially here a window of opportunity for investment.
Yes, indeed, this is absolutely true. I think three things are happening. First of all, there is a coherent plan, a plan over the next 10 years or so, 8 to 10 years, which focuses on a systematic development of the infrastructure base. Secondly, clearly the current growth rate, as we have said earlier, does indicate the capacity of the Nigerian economy to provide tremendous opportunities for infrastructure investors. Thirdly, and this is, I think, is perhaps the key, is that the government is now putting in place a credible and consistent framework that is intended to promote private investments in infrastructure, particularly through public-private partnership arrangements. The Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, which I have the pleasure to head, is indeed the bulwark for that policy.
Now, of course, one of the big problems around infrastructure development in Nigeria and indeed in many African countries is the issue of consistency of policy. Now, you speak of putting together a credible plan that investors can believe in. But what guarantees can there be that things will be different this time around, because we know what has happened in the past?
Yes. Well, indeed. First of all, I think the plan, it's not only the plan, but also the fact that the plan is backed by a regulatory environment which is based on an enactment of a law which is intended not only to promote but to protect private investors in infrastructure.
Right.
As I said, the ICRC Act was enacted in 2005, although the commission itself was not established until 2008. But the purpose of that act and the purpose of the commission is to ensure that the environment is created and the framework, institutional framework is in place to ensure that foreign as well as domestic private investors that are interested particularly in investing in infrastructure have the necessary protection and the necessary environment to build confidence.
So let's look back over the time that the policy has been implemented. Have we begun seeing the results and fruit of that new policy? What kind of monies have we been seeing and where has that money been going?
Yes, indeed. And I think, as was recently stated by the Minister of Trade and Investment, over the past few months, we have seen significant interest being shown by investors from across the world. Okay. I think the Minister talked about over 4.9 trillion naira of investments proposed by various private investors, both in the domestic environment as well as internationally. But we have also received clear indications from multilateral as well as other bilateral investment agencies across the world, which shows tremendous interest in Nigeria, especially in key infrastructure sectors such as electricity, transportation, and indeed urban development.
Yeah, so let's talk about the funding model. So you want the private sector to come in and they, I suppose, partner with the government. Now, is that the best way to go about this? Aren't there better ways of doing this? Provide the environment for the private sector so the private sector comes and provides the service, because we do know, it's on record, the private sector works more efficiently without government.
Yes, indeed. I believe for investment in commercial areas, such as in manufacturing, in service provision, etc., it is true that direct private investments is the best vehicle and the best framework. But in sectors such as infrastructure, in electricity, in utilities generally, clearly the private sector cannot on its own sustain large investments without support and partnership from the public sector. Some of these investments obviously are in areas which tend to be natural monopolies.
Right.
And without government participation and support and appropriate regulatory environment, it is difficult for the private sector to act alone in these areas. And I think that is why, not just in Nigeria, but everywhere else in the world, we see the public-private partnership model being used extensively to promote development in infrastructure. Yeah.
Finally, Mansur, just talk to us about some of the measures that you have brought in to try to ensure that you attract the right amounts of money to fix the infrastructure problems.
Yes. Well, in the first instance, as I said, we have the legal and institutional framework, and this is, has been widely publicized all over the world, where the terms and conditions under which private investments in infrastructure will be supported, will be indeed aided by government has been identified. We have a clear institutional arrangement and framework where the ICRC intervenes between the private investors and the public agencies that are responsible for providing these infrastructure services to work together in partnership on the basis of clear agreements which are supported by law. That is one. Secondly, over the past 2 years, the government has embarked on a thorough, well-coordinated planning framework which is intended and indeed has succeeded in identifying sectors for infrastructure development where private investments will be encouraged and will be promoted. We are also working with a number of international agencies, particularly multilateral institutions, to provide the necessary support that will give confidence to investors through, for instance, appropriate guarantees and perhaps supporting investment by these institutions.